Mike Williams on his Paul is dead. Research and the fact that the Beatles did not write their songs. We will also talk about Donald Trump and the plan for greater Israel. I hope you enjoy the show.
Hello.
That was great.
I threw that together in about 10 minutes. Basically, just to everyone, welcome to Billy Watson TV. I've got Mike Williams on for the 10th time, so we're quite familiar with each other, so expect some banter and whatnot. Basically, I've wrote some books, as you might be aware of, and my girlfriend discovered how you can use AI to turn anything into a song by entering the lyrics, pushing a button, and a song pops out. So rather than just have your picture there, I says, I'll pump an introduction into that and then put it along with the picture. It's amazing what it can do.
Yeah, it was very clever. I was wondering how you did it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of AI and all this stuff like that, but to be honest, like some of the songs are really great. Like they're on my website, but I've not really shared them much because I'm basically going through all my books, turning them all into songs, and it's a huge, massive project. But some of them, like I play them walking around doing my postie job or whatever, and they're really catchy. And I'm actually going to ask some people who know more about music than I do to transpose the chords so that I can theoretically play along with some of them.
Okay.
But it's, I've always wanted to collaborate with musicians and stuff like that. And, I'm not really musically talented enough to jump in with jam sessions and things. So this is a way to kind of showcase the lyrics. I think you've seen some on Substack. That was a similar kind of thing.
Yeah. I've been using some AI to create cover art for my songs, Billy. It's very good. Once you get the hang of it, some good stuff gets generated. I'm not a big fan of using it to control us, but as a tool to be able to help with creativity.
Well, yeah, I've got another side project. It's called eVideo Agency, and I bought some software for that. I've not made it live yet, but some of that one app of that is an image creator, and you just describe something, and the images it comes back with are like absolutely stunning. It's like amazing. It's like wow.
Yeah, that's like the tool that I'm using. It is amazing. You type in a scenario or what it is you want to see, or it's a city street with cars.
Yeah.
And it bangs out all these images. So, like I said, as a tool to help us with some creative aspects like cover art and stuff like that, creating intros for your shows, I think it's fabulous. But as the Borg to control us, not so good.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like lots of musicians, and just for instance, they might create jingles or whatever. They're probably going to get put out of work. There's lots of photographers, can't do their job because this AI can do everything. I think that's the purpose. It's like we think it's good, we're using it, but ultimately, it's going to take a lot of jobs away from various artists.
The lawsuits have already started in the music industry because the way the AI works when it creates music, it is scouring the earth of all of the songs that have been released, and it's learning and it's pulling things together, and there have been situations. I've been watching a couple of YouTube channels where they talk about this, where what the AI produced is almost an exact ripoff of somebody's song, and that in itself presents a lot of problems because it's stealing, in essence, from the creator of that song. So, like I said, it's a fine line that has to be walked. And what I don't want to see happen is where people who are not musicians to use the AI to just, let's say, not just to write a song, but to put an entire album out and then say that they created music that, I know some people are not going to like what I'm saying, but there's a lot of people out there like myself and many other musicians that have put a lot of years, a lot of time into learning music, creating music, recording music, publishing it, getting it distributed, and so on. And so I don't know. To me, it comes across as it's a little bit of cheating, if you ask me. But
100%. That's why I've called my when I put songs out, I call it Billy Watson and his all-star imaginary band. It's like
yes,
AI band, you know.
yeah,
And just to let people, it's quite obvious, but again, it will get better.
yeah.
I
It's
mean,
a
it's not
slippery
that
slope.
obvious, but
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, and we're going to have to see where it goes, and hopefully enough content creators and musicians and so on, and anybody else who's creating work that the AI is lifting will be able to make enough noise to keep it in check. But I don't know. I don't have high hopes for that.
no, there was a band I went to see in Glasgow. They're called Yacht, but it's an acronym, so there's dots in between each letter. And they were quite open that their latest album, they used AI to help create it. So I talked to them in an interview after it, and they were saying, because at the time I was like a bit confused, what is this AI all about? But they was like giving melodies, and they said, oh, they choose which melodies to use, and they choose which songs to use, you know, and they kind of put it together like that.
See, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that because to me, I didn't create that.
Yeah.
So to me, as a musician and a songwriter, that troubles me. That's exactly what I was talking about before, where the AI is actually creating the content and you're like, oh, I like that. So I think I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
You know, I think if in certain places where you get some ideas and it helps you to, I don't know, enhance the song or maybe kind of put the song together, maybe, I don't know. Like I said, it's a very slippery slope.
Yeah, definitely. It was also, I just was catching up on some of your stuff there, and I watched the Led Zeppelin video you had on Rumble,
Yes.
whereby Jimmy Page got credited for a lot of songs that are very similar to older songs like from Bert Jansch and various other people. And then he just outright claims them for himself, which is stealing, you could say.
Yeah. The Led Zeppelin has been known for, well, it's been known for a long time that they ripped off a lot of the old blues artists and they plagiarized the songs. And they didn't bother, in most cases, to put the original songwriter's name down for credit. And later on, when people were calling it out, that changed, where they then added or included that person, the original songwriter's name, on the song credits. But it's interesting that you have to get called out for it. And you have to make enough noise in order for somebody to do the right thing. I mean, that's really the problem with the world today, right? Is people are incapable of doing the right thing.
This is it.
Right? So, yeah, that's been known for a long time about some of Led Zeppelin's songs.
Yep. So just before we get into it, last time I spoke to you, you were telling us how, you were ill, basically, from possibly doing this research, and I just wondered how you're feeling these days. Are you feeling better? Are you up to full speed, or are you still kind of getting moments where you're feeling?
Yeah, I would say I'm about 98%. As I mentioned in that show, Billy, that I never fully recovered from whatever took place on December 15th of 2019, 5 years ago. And I really don't have any idea what happened. It was very weird that the timing of it seemed to be tied to the work that I was doing on whether the Beatles wrote all their own music or not. And for those who want to know more about what we're talking about, I'll send Billy over the link or to his show, and I have it up on my Rumble page as well, and you can take a listen to it. So, but I feel okay. I still have some days where I feel like my chest is a little tight, the breathing's a little difficult, but nothing near as bad as it was back in December of 2019. So I count my blessings from that perspective. So generally speaking, I'm okay. I'm in good shape.
That's good to hear. You're definitely looking pretty good. You disappeared just as I said that. I was going to ask, I was also listening to an interview you've done with Sophia, I think it was, with regard to glyphosate. Is that what it's called?
Glyphosate, yeah, that's a long time ago. Yeah, that was a video that YouTube pulled.
All right. Well, that's very interesting. I've been doing this postman job, and I'm out a long time, and I don't really like to eat bread, but I'm eating rolls and sandwiches, and I've actually got some arthritis in my shoulders, and I feel like I need to cut bread out after listening to that, because the effects and the poisoning is going on. We know, and I go into supermarkets now, it's just like, this is complete junk,
Yeah.
And even, but the thing with that is it's on the fruit is getting sprayed everywhere, and it's a very big danger that.
Well, the fruit is being sprayed with Apeel.
Yeah.
It's APEEL. It's a Bill Gates invention, and that's on a lot of fruit, and it's not good for you. Nobody really knows the repercussions because it was just done. So as usual with everything that they do, there's no testing, there's no making the public aware. They just go and do it. And
as you were saying on the show, though, it seems like they do know the human body that well, that it's very specific in what they're doing. It's not by accident they're doing these things. And the latest one we're hearing about is obviously stuff for the cows that are going to put in the milk and things like this.
Yeah.
And everybody's boycotting that. It's just a war on all fronts. You don't know what to eat, what to drink.
Well, they do know an awful lot about how the human body works. They know how the human mind works. So all of these stories that are out there that are making it sound like they're still experimenting and they're still trying to figure things out, I don't know. I find that very sketchy, because we can see that they're doing things that are very pinpointed as to how it affects our mind, body, and spirit. So they know how to target things. As an example, there are drugs out there, they call them biologics, and they're to help people who have rheumatoid arthritis. So we have to ask the question, how do they know to get this drug to target the arthritis in the joints? Somebody's going to say, well, it's because of science and all that stuff. And yeah, of course there's science. But my point being is that they're able to pinpoint it very, very specifically. This drug's going to do this, and you're going to feel better if you have RA. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Even the whole the COVID thing with the mRNA, that was very specific. I mean, they're slipping, or they did slip, nanotechnology into the shots. This is no longer debatable. This is not a conspiracy theory anymore. Through microscopy, many researchers and scientists have isolated it. It's there, along with graphene. It's funny, when I was doing Clown World News back in, I think it was 2021, I found an article on the NIH website, the government website. It's Fauci's deal, going back to 2014, where they were talking about introducing graphene into therapeutics, into drugs, into shots. That was back in 2014. They had a paper on it. So, and then, of course, when it came out that graphene was indeed in the shots, it was no surprise. Again, it's something that they have been working on for a very, very long time, and then they just don't say anything. They don't tell anybody. And it's not until intrepid researchers and scientists and good people come out and dig deep does this stuff emerge. The problem is by the time that it bubbles to the surface, their dirty deed is done.
Yep.
That's the problem.
Well, this is the whole thing about COVID. Just people just seem to have moved on and forgotten about it. But a lot of people are acknowledging, oh yeah, I know somebody that's died, or blah blah blah. And even the media outlets say there's even a kind of slow release in the truth, but not the full truth. But oh yeah, maybe some of these shots done bad. It's like they've done their deed and now they're admitting it, and nobody's really saying anything about it. But it's just it's just amazing how people don't stop and say, hold on a minute, what's going on here? Let's do something about these tyrants.
Right.
Poisoning us and trying to kill us. And like I was trying to do comedy, and I've been barred. Like I've got my name's different things I've done, but I got ostracized during that period for trying to help people, and still my name's Mud. But ultimately, all this truth's coming out, but it still doesn't stop folk thinking, "Oh, he's crazy one outside the box." Like I was the one speaking the truth, trying to help people,
Right.
and we're still ostracized. Considered crazy for doing research and trying to help people. And they've got these 5G towers up everywhere. I just wonder if there's going to be somewhere down the line where they turn them up a bit, and all this graphene that's in people is going to cause more death or whatever.
Yeah, they're going to light up because graphene is a conductor with frequencies. This is something else I covered going back, I guess, about 3 years ago or so. And you're talking about people not getting it. The whole thing with Trump.
Oh, God.
And with the vaccine, and I should call it the injection, because it is not a vaccine. In fact, the court ruled here in the United States that it was not a vaccine. And he has not backed off. He hasn't apologized. He's not talking about pulling anything. In fact, he continues to engage with the pharmaceutical companies, with Pfizer, Moderna, and people just, I don't know, Billy. There is about as dense can be. I don't have any idea how it is that people are not holding his feet to the fire on this thing, and they just jumped right back in the boat with him after so many people died or were injured because of those shots. And he was calling it the greatest thing since the light bulb. And like I said, he hasn't backed off it.
Well, Operation Warp Speed, but the thing with, for people still believing in politics is one thing. So there's obviously Trump or Kamala Harris, the lesser of two evils, they're thinking. And, it's debatable if there's much between them. But, now he's got RFK Jr. kind of on board with his gravelly voice. I just can't stand listening to. He puts me off right away. But he's supposedly anti-vax, but still he's pro-vax, but pro-choice is the thing, or whatever.
Yeah, he's pro more testing. That's where his stance is. So he'll say, I am not anti-vax. I'm saying that the testing has to be more robust and more thorough. But here's the thing with RFK Jr. First of all, he has got to go through the Congress to land that position with HHS. And it's a possibility that that's not going to happen. So it's possible that what's going on right now with RFK in the forefront, or Trump basically walking him around and showing him off, it's like show and tell, is nothing more than a subliminal way of trying to get people to believe that he is doing something about the injections, or he is doing something about the medical and pharmaceutical industries and their exploitive ways. But, he might not make it through the Congress to get approved as the head of HHS, and that'll be that. And if he does get approved, there's always the possibility that his role is going to be watered down from the standpoint of he's going to be told, don't touch this. It's okay to talk about this and go after that, but do not touch this. That is off the table. And I think that that's very possible. And the other thing that RFK Jr. made aware to a lot of people when he was still in the running for the nomination to become president is his connection into Israel. And that Rabbi Shmuley, who is a reprehensible person. And it was very clear when Shmuley did that quote interview with RFK that Shmuley had him by the nuts. So that tells me there's something in RFK Jr.'s background that they're hanging over his head. Because when he did that interview with Shmuley, Robert Kennedy did not look comfortable. He looked off, and he looked very uneasy. So something a lot deeper is going on there between him and whatever it is that the Jews are hanging over his head.
Yep. I mean, we're going to get into this a bit later maybe, but I don't know if you want to go into it now. The whole Donald Trump is our savior. No, he's not. He's definitely controlled up, like they all are. You know, you don't get to this position to be president. What is a president anyway? It's a president of a corporation, and citizens are essentially the employees.
Yeah.
So when did the employees ever decide who the president of the company was? Never.
Never. That's
So
right.
it's just like a pretend poll that they're doing. All right, and do they actually count the votes and say, "Oh yeah, you won"? It's all pre-planned, and some people even go as far as, you know, when Trump was president, saying the 45th and then the 47th president. Like, there's some numerology involved in all this. You know, it's basically all the big theatre show, which is something, and we're all investing in it. You know, with our voting it and watching it on TV, and you know, it's like a big spell that a lot of people, the programs, I just call a lot of people just a walking program. You know, they just can't think for themselves, basically. So whatever the TV tells them, or that's happening, that's reality. So it's very difficult to get through to these people, you know, and it's to navigate the world in a world where everyone's like that is like almost hell itself.
Yeah, people just don't. They don't understand, Billy. It's, you know, I knew Jordan Maxwell, the late great Jordan Maxwell, and I did a number of shows with Jordan, and also had a number of just discussions with him through Skype. We would just connect and we would just talk. And one of the things that Jordan used to say, and if you listen to him, I'm talking to the folks in the audience, there's no doubt you've heard him say this. If people only knew how the world really works.
Yeah.
And he always emphasized really works.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. People do not understand how the world really works. And going back a few months ago when Trump had that staged assassination, it's completely staged. He came out later and said he was bleeding profusely. Clearly, he was not bleeding profusely. In fact, he wasn't bleeding at all. It was a little bit of a amateur makeup job when he ducked below the behind the podium. But my point being is I did 2 videos on that, and I took a look at all of the occult numerology that was involved in that event. And there were 2 numbers that were very prominent, the number 7 and the number 13. There was also 9 and 11, but 7 and 13 were very prominent. And the number 7 represents spiritual enlightenment. It represents the number of perfection at the level of man. 8 in the Kabbalah is perfection at God's level. And the number 13, a simple way to look at that would be that it is the Savior and his 12 disciples. Okay, that's one interpretation of the number 13. It also has to do with going back to Osiris and the 13 body parts that were recovered to put it back together again and all that stuff. But the number 7 is very, very prominent around Donald Trump. And so when I did the analysis, I took a lot of time to do it too. I declared back, when was that? Butler, PA, July? I think it was July of this year. I said, he's going to be selected. It's going to be him for a second term in the White House. And then what happened was they had hats created, Make America Great Again, with the numbers 45 and 47 on the side of the hat. Well, 45 is 9, 4 plus 5 is 9, and 47 is 4 plus 7 equals 11. So people were walking around with a hat that was encoded with 9/11. Now, 9/11 events are events that are put in play to make major transformational change. And that's what Trump represents. And I said in that video, in the analysis going back to July, Trump's role is going to be to shepherd his followers, which would be people who consider themselves to be nationalists, constitutionalists, people who think that or want to believe that they're sovereign. So it's that kludge of the population of Trump's followers. Like his Q following is also in that bucket. He's going to lead them right into the New World Order. And we see it happening as we speak. He's already talking about digital currency. And then everything he's doing now to to push Israel, to help them in their push, I should say, for their greater Israel plan. And that's what's going on as we speak. We take a look at what happened in Syria. That's not rebels doing that. That's the United States and Israel doing that. And so he's going to march them right into 2030. 2030 is a very big milestone for the New World Order, for the deep state, however you want to refer to them, whatever label you want to give them. And so Trump's job is to round up all of his followers in those categories: constitutionalists, nationalists, people who want to be sovereigns. And he's going to walk them right into the New World Order's backyard, and they're going to cheer him on as he does it. Because at the end of the day, what it comes down to with Trump is idol worship. His followers worship this guy.
God knows how.
They worship him. He is like the number 13 is the savior and the 12 disciples. He's the savior.
Was Trump, probably primed for this role, or, he got in debt and with all his business dealings, and then he's had to toe the line. Somebody thought it could be a useful kind of tool, But to me, when all the years with Trump in his business, the guy with the orange hair, a bit wacky, then I don't understand how he's went from that. Maybe the Apprentice TV show helped his personality, and then all of a sudden he's the guy to come in. And how is he a politician? I guess back in the day, people were dropping clues, or you should be president and this kind of thing, just planting the seeds. Because he's obviously playing a role. I mean, all these presidents. I mean, Biden, was he running the world? He couldn't tie his own shoelaces, as far as
Right. And there are people, really, half the population of the United States actually believe that a demented guy was running the country, or somebody wearing a latex mask pretending to be the demented guy was
Jim Carrey
running the country. And Trump, I believe, was in the pipeline for a very long time. I don't think he just happened to fall into it. The whole thing with The Apprentice and the TV show was to create a celebrity status around him. It's a pop culture thing. So the people, they want pop culture. People, they want celebrities. That's how they think. It's a celebrity mentality. It's a worship of celebrities. So what do you give them? You give them a celebrity. You give them somebody that, that they believe that they're connected into, somebody that they believe that they resonate with. It's just phenomenal to me. And this is something that we see all the time. And I talk about this with all of my Beatles research, because the Beatles were also gods to legions of fans, and still are to this day. And there's all of this idol worship that takes place. So what happens is they become Pied Pipers. So Donald Trump is a Pied Piper. The Beatles are a Pied Piper. Led Zeppelin, a Pied Piper. I mean, we can go right down the line. Elon Musk is another one that I can't believe people are buying this guy's bullshit. Another Pied Piper.
I was again in Turkey recently, and I talked to you before the show, and you go into like Antalya Museum, right? It's got all this ancient stuff, and there's this portrait of Elon Musk. Like, what the hell? What the fuck? And it's popping up everywhere. I was went to a sand sculptor show. It was all about space, right? So they're indoctrinating people in Star Wars and First Man in the Moon, all these sand sculptures. There's one of SpaceX, Elon Musk. It's like, fucking hell, can't I get away from this guy? And again, people talk about him, he's a billionaire and he's doing this and he's doing that. No, he's a front man, and he's playing a role and then he's talking about, AI is coming, so I might as well be the one that's going to control it and for the people, you know what I mean? And
right.
Obviously they're not on our side.
Yeah, no, he's Elon Musk is another front man. He's another character in the theater production. And there's a reason why they connected him in with Trump. And Joe Rogan had the split, thing. Yeah, Rogan's the same thing. Rogan is, he's another one that is playing a role. They're all playing a role. The whole thing is, like I said, it's a theater production, and it's, if you take a look at Trump's appointments that he wants to bring on board, it's just a who's who of Zionism.
Yeah,
and he's got this one lunatic. Let me see if I can pick her name out real quick. Her name is Elise Stefanik. Now, this Looney Tune actually, and I actually listened to this speech that she was giving, said that the United States, America, and Zionism are going to lead the Western world. So when we would talk about Zionism in the past, it was, Zionism doesn't really exist, or Zionism is not a big deal. Zionism is a very big deal. And like you, me, and many others have been trying to ring the bell on this thing to let them know that this is where they're going with this. And I see that Jess Thomas says that the shit show is mainly about Greater Israel. You're absolutely correct, Jess.
What would you describe if somebody asked you what is, Greater Israel? What is that? How would you describe what is Greater
Israel? Is going to be the hub of what the Jews believe is going to be their new world order. It's going to be the headquarters for their control of the world. And make no mistake about it, this is what they want. There's plenty of interviews with rabbis and other prominent Zionists that have talked about this. They're not saying that we want to do this and be left alone. No, they're saying we want to do this. We want to create the Greater Israel. We want to have this hub in the Middle East, this our HQ, and we're going to control the world. They're not going to be just happy staying where they are. I mean, they weren't happy staying where they were in 1948, the United Nations and the rest of the world handed Palestine over to them. So they weren't happy then. So do you think they're going to be happy now? No. And we can see that the push continues. And the thing is that people will say, well, why is there so much support for this? Well, there are researchers that, one of them is Robert Sepper. And I watched a video that Robert did, I guess about 9 months ago or so. Yeah, I guess about 9 months ago. And he said that the royal family can trace their lineage back to the house of David. Okay, so think about that. So if the royal family is tracing their ancestry back to the house of David, well then obviously they have a very vested interest in what goes on in the Middle East, in Israel, back to Jerusalem. So they want to create their new Zion. And of course, I know some folks might say, well, the buck doesn't stop with the royal family. It goes back to the city of London and the Rothschilds. Well, there you go. Palestine was given to the Rothschilds after World War I, and it was given to the Rothschilds via the Balfour Declaration.
Yep.
So the point they're trying to make is the power structure has a vested interest in ensuring that they have total control of that geography. And that's how it's playing out.
I sent you a link just before the show to an author called Christopher John Bjerknes, and he basically talks about like they want us exterminated essentially, and like in Syria, as soon as this change happened, apparently there's lots of Christians getting wiped out, and it's almost like they're putting the Muslims and the Christians against each other as well.
Yes,
and that was all created. Islam was created by the Vatican to be in, Albert Pike talked about that, so they can play the two off against each other, and they're just sitting playing all these cards and laughing at us basically as we destroy each other. And that's part of the reason for all the immigration and the boats coming in, and divide and conquer. that's all part of that plan as well.
Yeah, but that's what they do. They're very good at dividing and conquering, and it's not just the Jews, who I refer to as the Khazarian mafia. Goes up the ladder. You got the Jesuits involved. You've got the black nobility. All of these different secret societies and organizations, many of which are truly shadow people. We will never know who they are, and this is how the world works. I mean, I sent Billy a chart, folks, 2 charts, and yeah, that one there is, and actually, I got the you can keep that up there, Billy. But this is the big one here.
Hold on.
It's okay. Yeah. See, I have the
Right.
Dylan Monroe is the gentleman who, I guess he has a team that has put this together. And the reason why I sent this to Billy is because when people talk about, most people, the majority of people talk about changing the world, and Trump's going to do this or Trump's going to do that, or if it's not Trump, pick somebody else. That pyramid is what we're talking about. And the piece of that pyramid that people focus on is the bottom tier, the base of that pyramid. So this is where you have your corporations, and this is where you have the World Financial Control, the world institutions, the UN, the European Union, the WHO, NATO, BRICS, and you just keep on making your way down. And at the very bottom of that lower tier of that pyramid is us.
The zombies.
The peasants, the 9-to-5 slaves. And unfortunately, that's where most people spend their time focused. And they think that Trump is going to, well, they just naively believe he's going to fix just that part. He's not going to fix that part. He's a player within that lower tier of the pyramid. And most people have no concept of, if you move up another block and you have the entire Masonic structure, and above that, you have the Vatican and the Jesuit order. And by the way, within the center, the orange tier, where it says Vatican, inside there, it has Thelema. That's Aleister Crowley's religion. And I have been telling my audience for a very long time that the spiritual philosophy and ideology of the controllers is centered in Thelema, which is really Luciferianism. It's the cult of Pan. It's the cult of Dionysus. So the cult of Dionysus, the cult of Pan, Luciferianism, they have very, very similar tenets. And then as we move up the pyramid, we start getting into some very esoteric types of structures that most people really don't have any clue about. So this is why when we talk about changing this place, when I tell people, look, it's a lot more difficult than you think it is. You're taking a very simplistic view of how all of this works. And even your simplistic view is simple, because most people boil it down to Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, and they have no concept of what is encapsulated around that in itself. And it's all of this corporatism. That's the corporate matrix that just has everything boxed in.
So who put that together?
Dylan Monroe, and it's referred to as the World Hierarchy Pyramid. I'll send you a link.
Yeah, just for people to
he has a Rumble channel, and some of the stuff that he gets into I'm not big on, but I have to give credit where credit is due, and an awful lot of work went into that.
I think I watched that. It's like a 5-hour video he does on that. I think
there's a video on it too. Yes, he did a video, and I'll send you the link to that as well, Billy, where he actually goes through his chart and explains tier by tier who's who and what's going on. It's a very eye-opening illustration, and I think everybody needs to look at it, because the only way you're really going to understand how to make change, if change is even possible, is you have to get your arms around and have a grasp of what's there, what's really there, not what you think is there because that's what your television is telling you is there.
Yeah.
Or
Hell,
some,
live vision.
or some, talking head is telling you how things work or how things are going to work. The other chart was the other one, Billy, if you could throw that up real quick. So this, I don't know who the author is of this one. I stumbled across this and I was looking for an author and I couldn't find one. So if you are the author, please email me, and so I can give you credit for this. But this is another example. It's not nearly as involved as Dylan's pyramid, but this is to give you an idea of how the corporate control system works. And I've told my audience many, many times over the years that Freemasonry, if we just focus on Freemasonry for a moment, is structured exactly like an international corporation. It's a pyramid. So if we take a look at this chart, it's titled the Global Criminal Enterprise Span of Control. And if we go to the far left in the gray box, it says Finance and Accounting. So that's where you have your Bank of International Settlements, the central banks, the UN World Bank. So this is all the financial control. And then if you go to the right, you have marketing and communications, just like a corporation has. These are functions within corporations: the mainstream media, social media, search engines, censorship industry, the World Economic Forum, professional associations, and so on. And if we go to the right, we have research and development. This would be the bioweapons and nanotech, transhumanism, genetics, all of that. Then you have information technology. So there's an IT function within the corporate matrix. So this would be the BIS, or the Bank of International Settlements, tokenization. So tokenization means it's the ownership of everything. So you'll hear this term more and more now with digital currency. They're going to tokenize. That means they're going to own everything. And if we go to the right, we have operations. So these would be functions and organizations within the corporate crime enterprise that are responsible for making things happen. So you have strategy, and then below strategy, you have execution. You have to put things into play. And the way things are put into play are through operational arms, operational entities or organizations within this corporate system. Distribution and transportation, human resources, security, and then you have governance, law, and policies. So the reason why I'm talking about this for the audience is so that you can, again, get another view of how absolutely complex this is.
It's actually insane, just the level of organization. I mean, you look at that, you just think, God, we're fucked.
That's because it's been around a long time, Billy. And that's why I tell people, I would explain to my audience, these international organizations, the UN, these internationalists, the World Bank, the UN, the BIS, the IMF, all of this stuff, it's there for a reason. It's not there so that they can just have a big social club and banter back and forth about what ifs regarding a one world order. No, that is what you're seeing right there. That is the governance. That is the corporate structure for the one world. And the walls are closing in. And I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but the reason why I'm taking everybody through this is because people have to get away from the very simplistic view of how things work. Because if you continue to think that way, absolutely nothing will change. Even if you know all this stuff, things may not change. but it's certainly not going to change if you're not familiar with how it really works.
I was listening to another interview you done with the guy who's got the YouTube channel Insanity is Sanity.
Yeah, Amir, that's a long time ago, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it must have just been your recent Rumble videos, so I was picking up on them.
Yeah.
And basically, he came to the viewpoint that is this human essentially? I mean, who would want to put this level of control in? And to what end? Is it a loose farm we're living in, or what's actually going on? Because I get up on a daily day. I don't want to go control humanity. You know what I mean? But I guess there's this parasitic element almost.
Yeah.
That wants to, direct the world, and it's almost they're doing it to a script, or it's just built upon things and built upon it. Is it evolved to this way, or is this the ultimate goal, or do we have aeons where it's like a satanic element, and then there's like a reset point where they maybe go underground, shit gets leveled, then there's like a utopian period, almost a golden age, and then back into the Satan realm, and then they come up, and then it's a control, and it's just the nature of this place, what's actually going on? Where are we? Is this
right
purgatory, and we can evolve, and those that don't belong here anymore will get the chance to leave, and those that still believe in the system will have to come back and play the game again? To what end is going on here? It's like just insane, the level of manipulation and control that, and these people seemingly working together, but at the same time it's compartmentalized, so everyone's going to their job, but ultimately it all comes together in the structure, the system.
Yeah, it's definitely parasitical, and my opinion is it goes beyond the human level. There are entities, whatever you want to call them, that are at the top steering the ship. And what this place really is, a lot of people have weighed in on it. I did a discussion with Mark Devlin going back about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I lose track of time sometimes, so the time frames may not be accurate, but I think it was about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we had this very question about, what is this place? What is Earth? What is this incarnation that we're in? And I tend to lean toward it being a simulation, a type of simulation. And this world is what it is because it's designed to be this way, because it's a lesson for the soul. So when the soul comes here, they come into this very dense world. And the first thing that it tries to do when you enter into this world is to detach you from source. So at a very basic level, one of the major lessons would be, what is it like to be detached from the creator, from source, from God? What's it like? So, and a lot, and people are going to have different opinions on this based upon, their beliefs, their religion, and so on. But that's why, Billy, when people ask me about how do you deal with this? I deal with it at an individual level. I look at it as this is an individual journey for me, for my soul's development. That's how I look at this. Because clearly when we go back to the graphs, the charts that you just flashed up there, to think that humanity is going to change that structure or have any impact on that structure when 99.9% of humanity is completely boxed in and fractured in their thinking, in their belief system. They're all fenced off. You can't get people to agree on anything. Whereas the controllers, I've talked about this before, they have differences. They don't all agree on everything. But the one thing that they're very good at is keeping their eye on the ball and making sure that they get to the goal line. So the discussions that they're having is, okay, I understand you don't agree with me, but you do agree that we have to get into the end zone, right? Yes, okay. Let's get there. And once we get there, then we'll sort out our differences. Because if we fight amongst each other now, to try to sort out what you want, what I want, what he wants, what she wants, it's going to take a long time, if ever, to spike the ball in the goal in the end zone. So don't worry about that. So that's how the controllers handle it. Humanity is completely opposite. Everybody's invested in their beliefs. Everybody's invested in the people that they worship, like we just talked about. You know, if you say something cross about Elon Musk, there's millions of people that want to jump down your throat. If you say that you don't agree with Trump and you've got a problem with him because of the fact of Operation Warp Speed, you've got millions of people that want to drag you out into the street and beat you. Everybody's divided. Everybody's divided. And so to think that we can try to get some kind of cohesiveness and get people to stop all that nonsense and to see the big picture, they have to rise up. They're all in the weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah, the example I use is there's a table full of marbles. Let's just say there's 1,000 marbles on the table. And you've got a guy sitting at the table and he's got his head down like this. He's staring at the table. He's got his eyes about, an inch or so from the top of the table. And you say to him, he's got his head down. You say, how many marbles are there? 5. Pick your head up. Why? Just pick your head up. He picks his head up, then he sees that there are 1,000 marbles, not 5. Most of humanity is looking at the table with their eyes 1 inch from the top of it and seeing 5 marbles.
Yeah. It's
Plain and simple.
Kind of like the religious zealots, they're really scary, you know what I mean? They've got one book, and whatever that book says was written 1,000 years ago. They don't know who it was or whatever. But with a drop of a hat, if some guy tells them, no, it's in the book, then they will act en masse.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, religion is a big problem, and religion obviously was put in place to be able to control people's spirituality and the direct connection between them and their divine, the source, God, and the creator. That's why it's there. I'm going to tell you a story. I did an interview with a guy. I'm not going to say who it is. And he contacted me going back a number of months ago. And he sent me an email and he said, hey, Mike, I really would like you to come on my podcast. He's got something like 30,000 followers on X, on Twitter. So before I say okay to any interview, I go take a look and see, what they're about. So I took a look at some of his content, and it was heavily, heavily Christian. Heavily Christian. Now, I don't have anything against somebody's belief system. I don't. But that being said, I also know that there is a cult-like mentality that people like myself may have to deal with because of what I cover. Not just with the Beatles, but my blogs and the interviews that I've done. So I'm saying this because I'm taking a look at this and I'm questioning whether I should connect with this guy. And so I wrote him back and I explained to him, look, I don't think I'm a good fit. I said, I see that you have a lot of Christian-based content. And I explained to him that I am a longtime deist. And I do not want to get into discussions and debates, Christianity versus deism, Christianity versus this, Christianity versus that. I'm not interested because he wanted to talk to me about the Beatles. And what I wanted to do, if I come on the show, is to talk about the Beatles, and that's it. And I've also tried to make...
They made a few comments about being bigger than Jesus and almost like an attack on Christianity.
Right. And when I talk about that, see, that's the other thing. When I talk about that, because that's the Beatles were put in place, part of their mission was to break down Christianity, to break down traditional values and institutionalized religion. And the biggest institutionalized religion in the United States, going back in the day, and probably still to this day, was Christianity. So when I talk about that piece of the Beatles and the attacking of Christianity, I'm talking about it as a statement of fact. It's not because I'm Christian. I'm talking about it because this is what was this was the mission that they were given. Part of their mission was to take down institutionalized religion, and in particular Christianity. It could have been Islam, and I would say that their job was to take Islam down. Okay, but a lot of people misconstrue that, and then they think, well, Mike's a Christian, and it's not that. In my earlier years, I was born and raised Roman Catholic, and then later on in my life, I did spend time, a number of years, 3 years, in a non-denominational Christian church, but that was a long time ago. And I have been a long, long time deist. So anyway, so I cover this with this guy. No, it's okay. It's okay. I think we need to talk about this, because he wanted to understand how the Beatles, as a psychological operation, were going after his faith, basically. That's what it comes down to. Make a long story short, I wind up doing an interview with this guy. It's 3 hours. We had a 3-hour talk. It was very enjoyable. Good guy. And we didn't get into any debates or discussions about this versus that. We just talked about the Beatles and what the Beatles' mission was, their social engineering initiative was all about. Well, he was going to release the show, and he writes me and says that he's going to have to table our discussion. He can't release the show, at least not yet. And, when, God only knows, I have no idea. Because there were a number of people, I guess his followers, members of the cult, that reached out to him and said, hey, that guy is anti-Israel.
Hey.
So he writes me back and he says, you're coming down hard on Israel. And I wrote him back. I said, as I should be. I have no clue. Honestly, if you're a Christian, I have no idea how it is you can tout Christian beliefs and, quote, Christ-like behavior when there is a massacre and a genocide taking place in Palestine. I have no idea how you reconcile that. And to make things even more challenging for the Christians now, Israel, through their proxies, have gone into Syria, and Syria has a very strong Christian population. And guess what these proxy rebels, who they're going after? They're going after the Christians. So all of the Christians, and a lot of them are evangelical Christians in the Scofield Bible, all of you that are on the sidelines with your pom-poms for Israel, you're going to be very sorry at the end of the day. Very sorry. And a lot of your own people are going to wind up dead because of their Greater Israel plan. Because all this stuff about Israel and the Old Testament, the Israelis are not the Hebrews of the Bible. They are the Khazars from Europe and the Radnites from Europe. That's who these people are. And there has been some very, very good science behind their DNA, which points them all back to Europe, not back to the Middle East. Okay, so I'm only making this point. So what happened was this guy, so he writes me, and so he shelves the interview, even though the interview, the 3 hours, Billy, was very good. And I took him through everything, and his audience would have learned a tremendous amount about the Beatles, what that was all about, and how they were put in play to take down their faith. He cans the interview. He self-censored himself because of noisemakers, because of noise in the line, because people didn't like what I was putting up with regard to what was taking place in the Middle East and what Zionism is all about. So he told me, I said to him, look, you're self-censoring. I said, it is what it is. Don't bother with the interview. Just kill it.
I don't understand how lots of people in America, especially the politicians, the first thing they get asked, do you support Israel? It was like, well, what's that got to do with America? You know?
Right. Well, that's because America is under foreign occupation. That's the other thing, that people who are supporting Israel and don't really understand Zionism. This country is under foreign occupation. Your presidency, the Congress, and the Supreme Court reside in the District of Columbia, which is not a state. It's not part of the Republic of the United States. It was a piece of land that was etched out with the Act of 1871, and it was given to the international bankers. And who are the international bankers? The Rothschilds and his tribe mates. But again, Billy, it goes back to what I was showing before. We're showing this. People don't understand.
Well, people think Russia and Putin's bad, and these people are enemies, but ultimately they're working together.
They are working together, and let me tell you how we know that. Because Israel and the United States went into Syria, and Russia did absolutely nothing. They didn't do anything. Well, I mean, in the past, we were told that Syria was an ally of Russia and vice versa, but I don't know. I guess they couldn't be bothered with this invasion. And the other thing, folks, that you should understand is modern day Russia is built upon Bolshevism.
Yep.
The Bolshevik Revolution going back to World War I. And everybody that thinks that Putin is he's the godsend, he's going to save the world, understand that, okay? The foundation of modern day Russia is the Bolsheviks. And if you go to any major city in Russia to this day, there's a giant statue of Vladimir Lenin in the center of those cities. So ask yourself, what's going on here? And you should be able to answer your own question by just opening your eyes and taking a look at, what you see, and going back into history and reading about what Bolshevism was all about. Who were the Bolsheviks? The Bolsheviks are the communists are the Zionists. It's just full circle. And this is what we're confronted with today. We're confronted with all this stuff today.
Have you heard about the Donme in Turkey? Ataturk basically was a Sabbatean Frankist. He claimed his lineage went back to Sabbatean Zevi.
Yes.
And basically, lots of, I shared that Christopher John Biertness with a couple of friends in Turkey, and my friend, she just doesn't want to believe it,
Yeah.
But the guys telling quite a convincing story,
Sabbatai Zevi, we won't get into it here, but in fact, I have a very good video, Billy, that I was going to put up within the next couple of days. It was on another channel, and it goes through Sabbatai Zevi, goes through Jacob Frank. People need to understand who these people are, because Jacob Frank was connected at the hip with Adam Weishaupt,
right,
and the Illuminati. So this is very important stuff. And again, it goes back. Sabbatai Zevi was saying that he was the Jewish Messiah. And his teaching said that you did everything opposite of good.
Yeah.
Everything is degraded, engage in reprehensible acts, sodomy,
adultery, etc.
Everything,
The more evil you do, then God's going to come back to save
right,
that.
yeah, right. Pedophilia. This was all Sabbatai's teachings, which Jacob Frank, picked up the baton and took it forward.
He claimed to be a reincarnation of Sabbatai and Zevi.
Yeah, he claimed to be the reincarnation. And Billy's right. I mean, the Sabbatai Zevi's ideology, his philosophy, said if we turn everything upside down, basically scorched earth, that will force the return of the Messiah.
Aye.
That's the thinking.
That's who's in control.
That's who's in control.
Aye.
And he had many, millions of followers, from what I understand,
Yeah.
back in the day. And so,
Well, they all had
you
to go underground because he got arrested and told they had to become Christian or Muslim.
yes,
So that's where this term crypto Jew came from. That
Yep.
you could pretend to be one or the other, but secretly.
he was
Yeah.
told, convert or we're going to kill you. It's like, okay, I'll convert. But what they did was they infiltrated all the other religions.
Yeah.
That's what they did. And all of the political systems within the various governments, the nation states. So it's, again, it's a parasitical force. We talked about this before. That's what it is. It's a parasite.
If you look at Keir Starmer, just came into power in Britain. He just came in and was like, "I'm a cunt. Get used to it." And basically,
Yeah.
he's not working for the people of Britain. That's for sure. You know what I mean?
No. It's, see, what's happened now is they have come out of the closet. They're no longer hiding. They've come right out. In fact, like I said, that Elise Stefanik, that Trump appointed, this loon, just flat out says it. America and Zionism run the show.
Yeah.
Okay.
I looked in the history of Hollywood as well, and that's been majorly a big force in America's mindset, and creating the American dream was almost like a
Yeah.
Hollywood thing.
Yep. Well, look, folks, read the Protocols of Zion. It was a document that was released in the early 1900s. The Jews say it's blasphemy, it's anti-Semitic, it's a forgery, it's a fake. Well, read it, because when you read it, you'll realize that it is a blueprint. It's a roadmap. And that what the protocols contain, if you read it with a critical mind and an open mind, you'll see that it's everything that has taken place and everything that is going to take place. Again, it's a roadmap.
For those that don't like to read, it's available, I think, on YouTube or BitChute or something like that. There's people reading it for you, so you can listen to it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, for people who don't like to read, take a listen to it. It's very important stuff, and yeah, you're going to be. I've been called. I'm sure Billy. You may have been called an anti-Semite. And what you have to get away from that stuff. You have to just look. Those words don't mean anything, right? These are labels that they put on people to try to browbeat you into submission. Don't take the bait. Just speak the truth. Speak the truth.
That was part of my ostracization from comedy. I was doing this comedy course, and the guy beside me was doing this topic. We were running a newspaper, and he chose the Holocaust. So the teacher was like, at the end of his skit, "Oh, well done, you didn't question the Holocaust." And I was like, "Why can't you question it? Surely that's the whole point of comedy. Is that you can question anything, but don't question that."
Right.
And then this other guy pops up, and then the teacher says to me, "Do you believe in it?" And I was like, "There's more to know than the official story." And then this other guy pops up, "Billy, you better be quiet, or we're going to they'll take you outside." I was like, "Well, now who's the Nazi?" And
unbelievable.
my name went bad after that, and people sending me emails. "I'm a good Jewish guy, blah blah blah, and you're despicable, basically." And any pictures you've taken of me, take them down off the internet. And yeah,
well, that's because the good Jewish guys and a lot of the Jews are completely brainwashed as well.
Yeah.
They have been fed the same stories that we have been fed. And I have two encyclopedias that go back into the 1950s. I think one was from 1959 and another one was 1955. Still have them. I looked up the Holocaust in those encyclopedias, and guess what, Billy? It's not there. The Holocaust is not in the encyclopedias. So one is the Columbia Desktop Encyclopedia, and the other one is Funk and Wagnall's. Two reputable encyclopedias. Now, if it actually took place, how is it that 10 to 15 years later, it's not in the encyclopedias? And I'm not the only one to point this out. There have been others who have other sets of encyclopedias that have said the same thing. It's not there. The Holocaust narrative didn't make its way into the mainstream narrative until the 1960s.
Well,
So
again, if you do the research, it was fabricated. I'm not saying nothing happened, but basically the deaths were caused by something else, and you know, the whole thing has been blown way, way out of proportion, completely wrong, not even in proportion to begin with. You know what I mean? It's a false story
Right.
put on the camps, etc. Some had cinemas, theatres, swimming places. There were work camps.
There
And
were work
then
camps. That's right.
the typhoid and everything was
They were
for
going to work to support the war effort.
Yeah.
And the Germans allowed the Red Cross to come in.
yeah.
The Red Cross documented 300,000 deaths, and not just Jewish deaths. There were other people in the
A
camps.
lot of them caused
obviously.
by the bombing that Britain and America done for a year to stop all the food supplies.
Yes.
So the bodies they found were starved. Well, that was caused on purpose.
Yeah. Well, the Germans, the protocols of war when the war started was to only engage military targets, military installations, places that manufacture military stuff like bombs and so on, right? And the Germans lived by that creed. It was the Allies, and in particular the British, that turned around and said, no, we're going to bomb civilian targets. The United States' job was to continue to bomb the military targets, and it was through Churchill, who was a scumbag,
Yep.
to bomb the civilian targets in Germany. And one of the most tragic events of World War II was the bombing of Dresden.
Yep.
There was nothing of military anything in Dresden, and 200,000 to 300,000 people were killed, incinerated with the bombing of Dresden.
And a lot of Tartarian type architecture got destroyed in these things as well.
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah. Well, so people are going to have to do, their research on everything, because everything is a lie. Anything worth knowing is a lie. And what I mean by that is, if knowing something would help you in your life, help you to make better decisions, to put you on a better path in life, then they're going to lie about it. Everything is a lie. And
so let's get to the topic of what I was going to start with about the Beatles, because the Beatles is a huge lie.
Yes.
And people can't comprehend, or the Fab Four, but actually there were the Ship Four, the polished a third. And again, you've done some great research on that. You've recently announced that you've given up doing your full-time kind of research, but you've still got an eye in there. But are we going to do a little bit of a roundup of some of your stuff? Again, you've spent many years on this topic. How much more is there to know? Because you painted the clear picture, and there's other people out there with different ideas, but I think your research stands out as being the go-to one with regard to especially your Rubber Soul work, which proves really that there's no way they could have come up with those songs for that album in that 30 days,
right?
Whatever it was.
Yeah. So what I did, I didn't give up. I retired the research for the reasons that Billy stated. I mean, I did it for 8 years, and I covered all the ground that I believed that I needed to cover, and it came full circle. So, and right, I was telling Billy the other day, maybe it was yesterday, Billy. I sent you a message. Periodically, what I do to update my website is to count up the number of views on my Beatles content. And previously, I only used to count the views on my 2 YouTube channels. So there's The Sage of Quay, which is my main channel, and then there's my Beatles channel, Mike Williams, Paul is Dead. And I would count the views up between those 2 channels. And the views were 5 million between my 2 YouTube channels, with my Paul is Dead channel making up 3.6 million of the 5.
Assuming these views are correct as well, because we know numbers get different.
Yeah, well, YouTube suppresses my views. I've known that for a long time. I've caught them a number of times pulling views out, but it just is what it is. So I'm just going to go with whatever numbers are there. But you're right. I mean, they do suppress. But what has really worked for me over the last year and a half or so is Rumble. Rumble, I've come to really like the platform. There is no suppression of the views. And so what I noticed is when I put my Beatle content up on Rumble, it takes off. So I'm getting 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 views per video. Whereas if I go back to YouTube, it'll say 5 to 10, maybe 12,000 views. Well, that same interview or that same presentation did 30 or 40,000 views on Rumble. So the reason why I'm telling you this is because I added my Rumble views as well. So the new number, the number of total views and listens to my content since inception, since September of 2016 through November of 2024, last month, 6.5 million.
Have you not done BitChute and Odyssey as well?
I do BitChute and Odyssey, but the numbers there, they're decent numbers there. But I can't count everything because I have to actually do it manually. So I take the big hitter platforms and I'll add those numbers up. Plus, it gives me buffer, Billy, because there's always going to be some nitwit that's going to say, I don't believe that your number is really 6.5 million. And like, well, I'm just counting 3 platforms. If you want to tack on Odyssey, BitChute, and Brighteon, you can go knock yourself out and make the number bigger if you'd like. So I always want to have a little bit of buffer because there's always people that want to try to knock the rungs out from your ladder. And so it's, it's a prudent
Quite a
way.
substantial reach you've had anyway over the years.
Yeah, I mean, look, people ask me all the time, you think more and more people are getting it? And my answer is yes, more and more people are getting it. More and more people who are critically thinking, awake, people who can assess things objectively, they get it. There are still, well, obviously there are people out there that believe that the Beatles were what the official narrative tells them, this great, fantastic, magical band with all of this chemistry, 2 greatest songwriters of all time for pop music. So you have that segment, which is huge. And then you've got within the Paul is Dead community, you have these other quote researchers that they like to focus on Paul being replaced. Not that that's not important because Paul was replaced back in 1966, but they don't want to go back in time and they don't want to take a look at the true creation story of the Beatles. They don't want to talk about that because they want to believe the Cinderella story. They want to believe that the Beatles were this organic, natural group that formed, these 4 guys from Liverpool, connected in with Brian Epstein, who had the record store NEMS, and then Brian got them a contract with EMI under the tutelage of George Martin, and then they went on to unparalleled fame and fortune. They want to believe that that entire process is organic and real. The problem with that is if you think that way, then you really don't understand, as Jordan Maxwell used to say, how the world really works. And we just went through those charts and showed the corporate span of control and the pyramid of power. And to think that the Beatles did what they did organically, at least up to a certain point, because some of them will say, oh, well, the deep state got involved when Billy got involved. So before that, the deep state was sound asleep at the switch, asleep at the wheel. They allowed this band to climb to tremendous heights. And then they decided to do something with him.
They just got an Ed Sullivan show to an audience of all of America.
Exactly. They just happened to wind up on the Ed Sullivan show and have all of the media attention that they got, which was really unparalleled at the time. That was a natural occurrence. It's not a natural occurrence, and but the thing is, the researchers that continue to focus on that, and they want to say that Mike's wrong. The Beatles wrote their music. Paul McCartney, justice for Paul McCartney. He was a brilliant songwriter. John was a brilliant songwriter. George would chime in once in a while. They want to believe that stuff. Look, it's a fairy tale. Or plain and simple. Believing that story is no different than me telling you that a 300-pound guy in a red suit and a white beard can slip down a chimney with a bag of Christmas gifts. It's the same thing. It's not how the world works. And to continue to believe that and then say, well, you're a Beatles researcher, researching the alternative narrative. You're missing a big piece of what it is that you should be looking at. I mean, you're only playing half the football field, right? So in the United States, for those who don't know, American football is 100 yards. So many of them started at the 50-yard line and went right. But they didn't take a look at the 50-yard line going back left to the very beginning. And, in fact, Billy, if you want to throw up one of the slides, it's the one, it's a 1960 to 1963 timeline.
Okay.
I can show I can talk to the audience a little bit about this so that they can get a better grip on, or better handle on what I'm talking about. It's, it's the one with, has a bunch of boxes on it and goes from left to right all the way across.
Okay. Is it that one?
That's it. Yeah. So to try to drive the point home, based upon what I was just talking about, here's the Beatles timeline from 1960 through 1963. So the Beatles go to Hamburg in August of 1960, and they're not very good at all. And it's not just me saying this. This is well documented. The Beatles themselves have talked about this. When they got to Hamburg, they were not very good musicians, marginal at best, and they showed no songwriting skills, none. And so in August of 1960, John is 20, Paul is 18, George is 17, and at that time, Pete Best is their drummer. So they are young, inexperienced, and they are rough around the edges. They are a bar and club band. And in fact, in the Beatles documentary, The Complete Beatles, their manager, Alan Williams, who was their manager at the time, tells a story where he was trying to get them into clubs in Hamburg, and he was told, don't bring that bum group, the Beatles, to Hamburg. A good thing going here, don't bring them here. So they spend August through December of 1961 in Hamburg, and it's a flop. It's a failure. In Joseph Niezgoda's book, Lennon Prophecy, he explains that both Paul and John come back home dejected because absolutely nothing materialized. But then something very interesting takes place. Starting in 1961, they start to book all of these club dates, and they're performing just about every day. I mean, they have maybe a day off here or there, but it's very consistent. They keep going along, booking all of these performances, these live gigs in these bars and these clubs, both locally within Liverpool and outside of Liverpool. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, who's doing all this booking? How is this happening? This is a band that just spent 4 months in Hamburg and fell on their face, and then they come back home, and all of a sudden, it's like a booking machine getting all of these gigs. So all of these gigs continue from 1961 up through when they arrive in America on February 7th of 1964.
Do you think that's when the Faustian deal was done?
The Faustian deal, according to memoirs, was done on October 24th of 1963 after the release of their first album, Please Please Me. So I'll get to that in a moment, Billy. Yeah, it's a good point to bring up. So we've got the Beatles now, right? So they're coming off this big disaster in Hamburg, and now they're getting all these gigs booked starting in 1961 through 62, 63, and like I said, heading into when they land in America, which was called the Beatles Conquering America. So we can talk about that a little bit too if I have time. But not only that, but they do they have an audition with Decca Records on January 1st of 1962. So 1 year, 1961, of doing these live gigs. They're still not a very good band. They're a bar and club group. They land an audition with Decca, major label. And we're told that they did 15 songs, 3 of which were original compositions, Like Dreamers Do, Hello Little Girl, and Loved of the Loved. And none of these songs saw the light of day on any of their albums released while the band was together. So that tells you something about the quality of those songs. They wound up on the anthology series. I think at least 2 of them did. And Decca turns them down. So Decca says, no, not interested. So then Brian Epstein takes tapes to George Martin in February of 1962. And George Martin, who was with EMI, and he's the head of the Parlophone label. Parlophone, EMI is the mother label, and Parlophone is a subsidiary. And George Martin actually was running Parlophone. He was running the Parlophone label. He was given the label to run at the age of 29. So they had big things slotted for George Martin. So Martin listens to the tapes, and he says, nope. If you want me to decide based upon what you're showing me, I'm not going to sign them. So now they're rejected by Decca. They're rejected by EMI Parlophone. And so at that point, right after George Martin says no, now the Beatles somehow wind up on the BBC. So in March of 1962, after flopping in Hamburg August through December of 1960, not getting the nod with the Decca audition, not getting the nod by George Martin, now they're playing their BBC gigs. And they play their BBC gigs from March of 1962 through May of 1965. How did that happen? How did that happen?
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting one.
Yeah, you do not get on the BBC, a major media outlet, unless you've got a machine behind you. So then what happens is EMI and George Martin have a change of heart. That's because George Martin, according to memoirs, was told to take the Beatles on. So in June of 1962, that's when their contract with EMI is signed. And there's a lot of speculation as to why George Martin had that about face. And I won't get into all the details here. I'll just tell you that my perspective is that at that time when George Martin turned him down in February of 62, he was not yet brought into the loop as to what the Beatles were going to be and what they were going to be used for. So when he declined, 4 months later, some conversations were had between February of 62 and June of 62 that said, oh, we're going to bring him on and you're going to manage them, in essence. So what happened, though, was when George Martin signed them and brought them on, he didn't work with them right away. He assigned that to Ron Richards. Ron Richards was an assistant or associate producer working with George Martin, and Ron Richards actually went on to go produce The Holly. So Ron Richards was not, he was not a schlep. And he worked with the band in the studio, and he couldn't get anything out of them. So when George Martin came, and I think it was Brian Epstein that listened to the playback, it was obvious that they weren't going anywhere because what they were listening to on the playback, what was recorded, was not very good. And that's when George Martin received another phone call. And he was told, no delegating. You've got to take this band under your wing, and you're going to be responsible for them. You're going to manage them. You're going to be their producer. So it was from that point on that George Martin was connected at the hip with the Beatles. And he played a very, very, very important role in making the Beatles what they became.
Now, he was known as the fifth Beatle.
Known as the fifth Beatle. So I have another chart there, Billy, if you can show the George Martin chart, where he gives some of his input and his feedback on his impressions of the Beatles. So these are all things that George Martin said. I have all of the audio and interviews. I just mentioned that when Brian Epstein showed him the tapes back in February of 62, he said to Brian Epstein, if you want me to judge them based on what you are playing me, I'm sorry, I need to turn you down. And then he said, on meeting the Beatles in 1962, I wasn't terribly impressed with the first stuff they did. And then in in the documentary produced by George Martin, he's talking to Howard Goodall, who's another composer and broadcaster and very accomplished. And he said, they had this wonderful charisma. They made you feel good. But I thought their music was rubbish. And then George Martin, in another interview, says that even though they had really nothing behind them, they were still fairly irreverent. And then he said, so I looked at these four guys and thought none of them shines above all the others. Now, this is an interesting thing to say, right? Because if John Lennon and Paul McCartney were these fantastic songwriters and writing songs all the time. In fact, in The Complete Beatles, it tells us that John Lennon and Paul McCartney, either individually or together, between 1956 and 1962, wrote 100 songs. They weren't recorded, but they wrote 100 songs. Yet, George Martin is saying they had nothing behind them. He said, Love Me Do was the best song I could find from them. I was very conscious it wasn't the big hit I was looking for. In fact, when George Martin first had the Beatles, when he was told to take them on, one of the first things that he did was to go look for songs for them to record. And then in another interview, he said they certainly had no, and in this interview, when he says this, George pauses because now he has to measure his words very carefully.
I was going to say discernible talent.
He says it wasn't too obvious they could be songwriters at this stage. Love Me Do was the best thing they had. And then he went on to say their songs were awful.
Was Ringo involved at this point? Do you know?
Ringo came on board. If you go to the chart that has the Mercy Beat article.
Yeah, hold on. I'll go to that one. Mercy Beat article. Is that this one?
Nope.
Right. Okay.
We'll do that later for Rubber Soul. It has a copy on the left-hand side, if you're looking at the chart, of Mercy Beat, and on the right-hand side is a little blurb. That's an extract from the article. Yeah, well, we'll talk about this one for now.
Yeah, right.
So, and then we'll find the Mercy Beat one. I did send it to you. Let me make sure I sent it to you.
I've got it. It's probably that one, is it?
Yes, that's it. You can keep, yeah. And we'll go to the Norman Smith one second.
Right, hold on. I'll just make that big.
All right, so the Mercy Beat article, and for those of you in the UK that Mersey Beat, sometimes I get comments that say, you're not pronouncing it correctly. So this was an article that was published in the August-September 1962 edition of Mercy Beat. And the article talks about the Beatles changing their drummer, so Pete Best is out and Ringo is in. But in that article, it says, the Beatles will fly to London to make recordings at EMI Studios. They will be recording numbers that have been specifically written for the group, which they have received from their recording manager, George Martin.
Bingo.
Okay? So the picture I'm painting, folks, the story here, is that the Beatles weren't these four genius, brilliant musicians, and Paul McCartney and John Lennon weren't these prolific genius songwriters. They were a creation of the Tavistock Institute that had linkages back to the Frankfurt School, Theodore Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Eric Fromm, that whole group. And as I mentioned to Billy previously, Tavistock created the Beatles along with the Rolling Stones and many other bands that came out of the British invasion to take down traditional values, to tear it down, and to also attack and dismantle institutionalized religion, in particular in the United States, that would be Christianity. That is what the Beatles' mission was, and they were going to do it through music. And the creation of the Beatles was another cultural Marxist entity. Cultural Marxism is Marxism that subverts from within, versus what I refer to as Lenin Marxism, which is revolution-based and denoted by violence. The Bolshevik Revolution, as an example, would be an example of Lenin Marxism. But the Frankfurt School, which came into being at the same time as the Tavistock Institute in the 1920s, they had a different take, and they were Jewish Marxist intellectuals. Their approach was very different. They said, look, this whole thing where it's violent is not going to work, because after the Bolshevik Revolution, the Marxists actually thought that they were going to be able to convert the rest of the world to Marxism. Workers unite. Remember that? For those of you,
Well, that's what Donald Trump done,
Yes.
when the fake shooting.
Right, exactly. But the Frankfurt School had a different take on this. And by the way, the Rothschilds hail from Frankfurt, Germany. I don't know if people know that. And there are many Jewish, German Marxists that have come out of Germany, including Marx himself, which that's not his real name. But in any case, be that as it may. So the Beatles were a creation of this Tavistock Frankfurt School ideology, social engineering initiative. The Beatles were the first band created for the sole purpose of social engineering at a worldwide level. So what we could do now, Billy, is if we can go to the Norman Smith article. So Norman Smith was their engineer from their first recordings. We'll go by their albums, Please Please Me through Rubber Soul, starting with Revolver, their 7th studio album. It was Jeff Emerick. But so Norman Smith did an interview with New Musical Express in 1971. New Musical Express, the editor, was a guy by the name of Roy Carr, and I'll talk about him. I'll talk about Roy in a bit as it pertains to Phil Spector. Very important. So Norman, that article said that he was not impressed at all when the Beatles were recording in the studio. He had his musical doubts, meaning their musical ability, was backed up with Love Me Do. He said, we had a hard time working on that one. And he said that they failed in the studio. This is their engineer. This is not George Martin. This is aside from George Martin. This is Norman Smith. And then he goes on to say that the Beatles talked their way into a contract. So this is the fictional aspect of the story that we always get, right? So we get the truth if you read between the lines, and then what they do is they puff it up. They pump up the tires. You can't talk your way into a contract. EMI was the major label. I think it was the largest label in the world at the time. You either had it or you didn't. They were not going to waste their time with somebody giving you a bunch of words and trying to talk their way into the door. Not going to happen. He said the same thing that George Martin said. They had so much personality and so much magic about them. Right? George Martin said they had charisma. This is what it was all about. It was about shaping them to be charismatic, for them to have charm. They didn't care about the music because they weren't going to write the music. They weren't going to record the music. That was all going to be done by the Tavistock EMI deep state team. And in all likelihood, Theodore Adorno was overseeing that operation, with George Martin being the managing director of that operation. But we will get to Phil Spector in a moment. He said we did their first album, Please Please Me, in one take. Now, in the article, he says that they were awful. They failed in the studio. And then Norman Smith turns around and says that they completed the first album in one take. We did the whole album in a day. That's how we did it back then. Well, how they did it back then, when they did an album in one day, was to call the studio players in. And the studio musicians would bang out the songs. The sheet music would be put in front of them, and they would just cruise right through it. That's how it would get done in one day. It wasn't getting done by a band of 4 guys that the sound engineer was saying that he was not impressed with. They were awful, and they failed in the studio, and they couldn't get Love Me Do down. That group of people did not record their first album in one take. And the story goes that it was 10 songs recorded in a single day in February of 1963. The 4 other songs were recorded earlier, and they were brought into the 14 tracks when they released their first debut album, Please Please Me, on March 22nd, which is the Skull and Bones number 322. It's also Genesis 322. For those of you who have your Bibles, read 322, and you'll understand what that also is representative of. So,
you also say that Ringo couldn't do the drum part or something in that. Well,
George Martin hired Andy White
Yeah.
to play the drums, and George Martin hired more than, in my view, than just Andy White to do the drums. He just talked about Andy White, and in an interview that, in a discussion, I should say, that George Martin had with Billy, aka Paul McCartney, and I believe it's in the documentary produced by George Martin. George is telling the story of when the Beatles came into the studio, and he was saying, he said, "Well, who's that guy?" And he goes, "Well, that's the drummer." He's talking about Ringo, and George Martin says, "Well, no, he's not the drummer. That's your drummer over there. I paid good money for that guy." He's talking about Andy White. But George Martin says something very, very important, and he didn't realize, I think, that he said it, or maybe he was masterfully speaking and he did know that he said it. He said, when he's talking to Paul McCartney, when they came into the studio, well, if Billy is Paul McCartney, he would have been one of the guys that was in the studio. George Martin would have said, when you and the band came into the studio, he said, when they came into the studio.
Yeah.
So that's another clue that Billy is not Paul McCartney. So anyway, I can go on with all of these examples, Billy. It's just phenomenal. If you go back to the timeline chart, let me just finish up there, because there's still some more important stuff there that I wanted to take the audience through. So that's okay. That's okay.
2 seconds.
Yeah, there you go. So now the Beatles didn't have any songs. Okay, George Martin said the best thing they had was Love Me Do, and that's if they even wrote Love Me Do. So they have no songs, and that's as of June of 1962. And then 9 months later, they come out with their first album, and that first album contains 8 original compositions, 6 covers and 8 originals. So a band that had nothing behind them, the best thing they had was Love Me Do, again, if they even wrote Love Me Do, now all of a sudden, magically, has the skills and the expertise to pen and record 8 original compositions. Then, 8 months later, in November of 1963, their second release, after Please Please Me, with the Beatles, was released on November 22nd, 1963. It's the same day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. 8 more original songs and 6 covers. So we have this band that has shown no indication or proof of songwriting skills. Their producer acknowledges that they didn't have any songs. And now all of a sudden, after June of 1962, after George Martin takes them in, 16 original songs pop out between the 2 albums, Please Please Me in March of 1963 and with the Beatles in November of 1963. And I can go on and on and on with this. Now, for somebody not to question this is amazing to me. Absolutely amazing to me. If we just bring that chart up one more time, Billy, I want to go through that box in the bottom left in yellow, because there's some important information there. If we use August of 1960, when the Beatles first arrived in Hamburg, as the stake in the ground and then move forward, here's the elapsed time. So again, they showed up in Hamburg, marginal musicians at best, a bar and club band, and not a very good one, and they showed no indication of songwriting skills. Hamburg to the Decca audition. They did that in 1 year and 4 months. From Hamburg to the EMI contract in June of 1962, 1 year and 10 months. From Hamburg to the release of their Please Please Me album, 2 years and 7 months. So if we take a look at some of these dates, it's absolutely not believable. Hamburg to when they arrived in the United States, 3 years and 5 months, roughly 3.5 years. So this nondescript bar and club band in August of 1960, with no indication or proof of songwriting skills, finds themselves in America on February 7th of 1964 with 2 albums under their belt. So I don't know. Maybe it's just me, Billy, but there's a lot of questionable activity taking place. Now, I told you I'd talk about Phil Spector. It was an interview that was sent to me by one of my listeners, a very, very interesting interview that Roy Carr from New Music Express, he's the editor, he interviewed Phil Spector in 1976. And that interview made its way into a music publication out of Australia called RAM, R-A-M.
Which is the title of Paul McCartney's first album as well.
It's interesting, right? And McCartney has his, it was his second release, his RAM album.
Right.
In that interview, Phil Spector said he played a major role with the Beatles, in the development of the Beatles. In fact, Phil Spector goes on to say that he was one of the main players in making the Beatles what they became. And he also said that, and Roy Carr, who was the editor of New Music Express, acknowledges, because Roy knew, Phil said, when they arrived in America on February 7th of 1964, was I not on that plane with them? So Roy Carr says, yeah, you were. And Phil goes on to say that, he did all this work with the band. And he also went on to say, and if George Martin wants to take issue with it and he wants to talk to me, let's have a conversation. I'm paraphrasing. So the thing with Phil, though, is people remember Phil because of his murdering of the actress back in, I think it was 2003. But I have to remind people that, that was 40 years, when he got himself involved in that murder. I think the actress's name was Lana Clarkson. When he murdered her, that was 40 years after he would have been involved with the Beatles.
He was officially involved with the Let It Be album, was he not?
Yes, it was. The story goes that my dogs are barking. Hope it's not too loud there.
That's right.
The story goes that John Lennon and George Harrison brought Spector in to work on the Let It Be album because John said that, and this is a quote from John, I'm going to paraphrase the quote, but he said that they handed Phil Spector a bunch of tapes or a bunch of shit, a pile of shit.
Yeah.
And he said, and Phil did a great job with it. He said it was the worst recordings ever.
Yeah.
And so
he also done John Lennon's Imagine album as well.
He worked on Imagine, the Plastic Ono Band. He worked on All Things Must Pass. So he did a lot of work that he was credited with the Beatles post their Beatle career, from Let It Be on.
Yeah.
But apparently, according to Phil, before that, he was not credited, but he was highly and very involved with the band. Now, the reason why this is important is because Phil, his house band was the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would mean that the Wrecking Crew, if we are to believe what Phil is saying in his interview from 1976, was involved in recording the Beatles' music. I mean that to me is a logical step to take. If Phil Spector was involved with the Beatles like he said he was, and he was working with them, probably in tandem with George Martin, and his house band, his de facto house band, was the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. I mean, all we have to do is connect some very easy dots. And that's not to say that there weren't musicians back in the UK that were doing the session work too, like Big Jim Sullivan, Vic Flick. We had Ronnie Verrill.
Jimmy Page.
Jimmy Page. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad you brought that up. I have a person that I know. I'm going fast here, folks, because I don't want to go past the 2 hours that Billy has allotted here. Who knew Dan Peake, who was one of the founding members. He knew him really well. One of the founding members of the band America. And America was produced by George Martin as well. So America was one of George Martin's bands. he wrote me. We had some email exchanges going back and forth. He told me that the person that is Dan's friend, I'm not going to say who it is. Dan told him that Jimmy Page played the lead guitar on "I Saw Her Standing There."
Right.
Okay.
Well, Jimmy Page himself, I'm sure I've read, he has admitted he was on some Beatles tracks.
Jimmy admitted to playing on Beatles albums in a post that he had on either Twitter or Instagram.
Yeah, I think it was
And
on
people wanted to argue with me and say, no, he's probably talking about the U.S. release of A Hard Day's Night, which had the some soundtrack music on it. But Jimmy didn't say he played on the soundtrack to the film. Jimmy said he played on the album.
Yep.
And that's a big difference. And that, the Hard Day's Night album out of the UK is 13 original, quote, compositions from the Beatles. So Jimmy Page is telling us what? That he was one of the musicians that played on the Hard Day's Night album. And then we have Bernard Purdie and the 21 tracks that he drummed on. And for all of those people that want to argue and say that, no, he drummed on the Tony Sheridan tracks, he did both. He drummed on the Tony Sheridan tracks. He was hired by Brian Epstein to put some more oomph and some more presence behind the drumming on those tracks for the U.S. market. And he also drummed on the 21 Beatle tracks from the early albums. So when he talks about the early albums, we're talking about that period between 1962 and 66. I suspect that Bernard is talking about maybe the first 3 albums. Please Please Me with the Beatles and A Hard Day's Night. It could also go into later albums, but that's what I suspect. And people will say, well, I can't believe Bernard because Bernard won't say, he won't tell us the names of the songs. The reason why Bernard did not name the songs is because in an article, an interview that he had many years ago, he was asked about that. And he said, I'm not going to give the names of the songs because I need it as leverage to receive the compensation that I believe that I deserve today, considering where the Beatles went after I recorded those tracks. So when he first did those tracks, I think he said he was paid something like $10,000 to do the drumming, to fix the drum tracks on those songs. And then later on, he took a look at where the Beatles went. He's like, well, that's me drumming on it, and I got paid $10,000 for this stuff. So in a Martin Drummer interview, I think it was Martin Drummer going back a number of years ago, actually more than a number of years ago, a long while back, he said that their people, meaning the Beatles people, finally reached out to him and said they were going to make it right. So I think what happened was, taking a guess at this, it's probably a pretty good guess. They said to Bernard, look, we'll write you a big check, okay? We'll write you a big check. They'll have a lot of zeros at the end. But you keep your mouth shut about which songs they are. You can't talk about the songs. That's what happened. And so, Bernard doesn't talk about it anymore. So I think that what happened was he got the check. Bernard said, fine, I won't talk about the songs. Everybody goes home happy.
I mean, to be honest, that's a wee bit rich because a lot of these session musicians know exactly what they're getting into. They get paid for the job, regardless of what goes on to do, but I guess you played his cards right.
Well, see, the way it works back in the day was these guys, even though you watched the documentary, The Wrecking Crew, they were going from gig to gig, recording these different songs. To them, it was just sitting down, getting the sheet music, and playing the music.
I think even a lot of them were creating the bass lines and,
Yes. Yeah, Carol Kay, that bass line on Good Vibrations, that's her.
Yeah.
That's her. Guys like Glenn Campbell, who was with the Wrecking Crew, Glenn would go do his own thing. These guys were brilliant session musicians. There was nothing that was going to stump them. They got the job done. Now, just quickly to wrap up on Rubber Soul, Billy, if that's okay.
Yep, sure.
Okay. So let's put the chart up where I show the timeline. On the right-hand side, I list all the songs, October and November. and how quickly the Beatles got through those songs. Yeah, that's the one right there. So I'll finish with this slide. I had more slides, but unfortunately we're out of time. You can watch my content and catch up with it. Okay, so there's two problems with Rubber Soul. One is 16 songs in 30 days is not possible. We're told that the Beatles did Rubber Soul between October 11th and November 11th of 1965, and they came into the studio empty with no songs. Some people want to argue that they had partial drafts of some of the songs, like Michelle, We Can Work It Out, What Goes On, and they brought Wade in from the basic rhythm tracks from the Help sessions earlier in 1965. But the thing is, there is no proof that they had partials of Michelle. There's no proof they had a partial draft of We Can Work It Out. And with What Goes On, the only thing that the official narrative tells us that they kept from the song, I think, was the chorus. That the entire song otherwise was completely revamped. So if you're going to revamp a song, it essentially means you're rewriting it. Okay, yeah. So those are some of the songs that people throw out there to say that, oh, it wasn't 16, Mike, it was something less. I believe it was 16 because I don't believe they wrote anything. That's why I say 16. In Mark Lewison's book, The Complete Beatles Chronicles, I think the book was published in the 1980s. He tells us that, in fact, it was his other book. It was the recordings, the Beatles recordings. He tells us in that book that the Beatles had to write more than a dozen songs in that 30-day period. So Mark Lewison, who is considered the Beatle historian, is telling us they had to write more than a dozen songs, which means they had to write 13, 14, 15, or 16 songs. And I'm saying 16 because, like I said, I don't believe the official narrative at all. They would have had to write 16 songs. I don't think they came in with anything. Scott Fryman, who is the musicologist and the composer that is responsible for the Decomposing the Beatles documentaries and Rubber Soul, explains to us that they came in empty. Okay, so we have a lot of sources here. We have Beatles sources, official narrative sources that are telling us that they came in empty. Now, Billy, if we can go to the one I sent you earlier today, this is the official Beatles fan magazine.
I've highlighted it down the bottom there.
Yeah, if you could, you can bring that up. Okay, so this comes to us from a fan magazine called The Beatles Book, and it's the Beatles' own monthly magazine, and this is edition number 27 from October of 1965. And this is what it tells us. Spare a thought this month for the Beatles' songwriting twosome John and Paul. They have got to write a whole new batch of numbers, including their next single, before the end of the month. They're talking about by the time they get to the end of November. On the plane coming back from America, so they had their tour in America in August of 1965, so they're going to return on August 31st. They were talking about it, and Paul said, now they're talking about writing the songs for the album, Rubber Soul. This is what Paul says about the Rubber Soul sessions. We have nothing up our sleeves at the moment. The cupboard is definitely bare. And then the article goes on with its fluff and says, but they have never let us down yet. And I know they won't this time either. So Paul McCartney, out of the horse's mouth, is saying they didn't have anything going into the Rubber Soul sessions. And for people that want to argue that they had 6 weeks in between when the tour ended and when they had to show up at EMI on October 11th of 65, in Mark Lewison's book, The Complete Beatles Chronicles, he tells us the Beatles had 6 weeks of vacation and no work, which means they weren't working on songs, which means they had to start the writing process when they got into EMI Studios on October 11th of 65, with the first day of recording being October 12th of 1965. So, Billy, if we can go back to the other chart with what you showed before with the dates. Yeah. All right, folks, a couple of things real quick, and I'll end with this. In August of 1966, in a BBC interview, Paul said that for Revolver, it took them at least 2 weeks to try to get one song written. One song took weeks. Yet, we're to believe that 16 songs, or 12 songs, or 13, or 14, or 15 songs were written in 4 weeks. In that August 5th, 1966 BBC interview, which was the same date that Revolver was released, Paul says that we're limited as a group. We're the first to say we're not all that good musically. So how could a band that has, at that point with Revolver, 7 studio albums under their belt, and being the brilliant band that they're supposed to be, how could they be limited as a group and not that good musically? For the Rubber Soul sessions, not one song took more than 5 takes to record the basic rhythm tracks. That number is ridiculous. If we fast forward to the White Album sessions in 1968, each song took dozens and dozens and dozens of takes to get it down. During that 30-day period, there were 6 days when there was no recording, and that was due to fan club obligations. That was 1 day. George Martin and Norman Smith had to mix. That was 2 days. They went out and received their MBEs from the Queen. That was 1 day. And they took 2 days out to do a TV show. So in October, they recorded 8 songs in 18 days with a total of 28 takes. That's an average of 3.5 takes per song. In November, they did the remaining 8 songs because they did 16 songs for Rubber Soul. 8 songs were recorded in 13 days, in 5 less days, with a total of 14 takes for all of the songs. And that's an average of about 2 takes per song. So between October 11th and November 11th, 1965, 16 songs in 31 days, with a total of 42 takes for all of the songs, which is an average of 2.5 takes per song. So for anybody who is a songwriter, a musician, and has spent time in the studio recording, you know that those numbers are not even remotely close to reality. 8 of the songs were started and completed on the same day. So 8 of the 16 songs they started and completed on the very same day. And 4 songs were completed on the very last day of recording, on November 11th of 1965. Now, if we go to the calendar real quick, let me just show you how this rolled out. If you could just, So the Beatles arrive on October 11th of 1965, and then the next day, Run for Your Life is in the bag. 1 day, boom, it's done. 2 days in, Drive My Car, done. 5 days in, Day Trippers in the bag. Then 7 days in, If I Needed Someone is completed. Norwegian Wood, 10 days in My Life, 11 days in, along with Nowhere Man. So they finish up In My Life and Nowhere Man on the exact same day, on October 22nd. And We Can Work It Out, 18 days in, that's knocked out. So I won't go through November because it's the same story. If you take a look at the box at the bottom of the November chart, those are the 4 songs that they did on that last day that we're told. And 2 of those songs, You Won't See Me and Girl, we are told via the official narrative, did not exist until that day. So they had to write from scratch, rehearse, and record 2 songs on the last day, and then finish up Wait, which they had to do vocals and overdubs on. That was the song they brought in from Help. And then they had to do I'm Looking Through You, which we're told they originally started on November 6th, and they finished up on November 11th. Now, one more thing, Billy. If I Needed Someone is an interesting song because it was, I think it was the Byrds that did a cover of If I Needed Someone. Let me just check that real quick.
Just where you do that's quite interesting. In this article here, it says that they went to dub their voices for the performance at Shea Stadium.
Yes, that's right. Yes, that's another important piece. Let's get to that in a moment.
Yeah.
But If I Needed Someone, what a lot of people don't realize is that the Beatles, we're told that the Beatles did If I Needed Someone on October 16th. They started the song and then completed the song on October 18th. 7 days in.
Right.
Okay? However, the Byrds also did the song If I Needed Someone And Billy, they released it on the same day that Revolver was released, on December 3rd of 1965.
The Revolver was released.
Rubber Soul, I mean.
Aye, Rubber
I'm
Soul.
sorry. They released it on the same day. Let me rephrase that. The Byrds released their version, If I Needed Someone, on the same day, on December 3rd, 1965, that Rubber Soul was released. So here's the thing. The question we should be asking. How did the Byrds have access to the song if the Beatles were writing it? If George Harrison was allegedly writing that song, how did the Byrds have access to the song? Somebody might say, well, George wrote it and then he ran over to the next studio where the Byrds were recording and he showed it to them and they learned it. And come on. If you believe that story, I have a bridge I can tell you. The way this song got recorded by both bands and released on the same day, on December 3rd of 1965, was the song was already written and the sheet music was put in front of the studio musicians weeks before, and the Byrds were doing the exact same thing the Beatles were doing for 30 days in October of 1965, singing the vocals. That's what was taking place. So a lot of people don't know that. That's kind of a little weird factoid about the song If I Needed Someone, that both bands recorded it apparently at the exact same time and released on the exact same day. And then, yes, if we go to, we'll finish up with this. It tells us that Brian's plan to film the Beatles' performance at Shea Stadium in America was a great success, and I hope that you will be able to see the finished result very soon. Some of the sounds were not quite right, and the boys will have to dub on their voices in the bits where the screaming prevented their vocals from being recorded. This is very important because I've been telling people for the longest time that these recordings that you see on YouTube, many of these recordings have been edited and overdubbed post-production.
Yeah.
Because back in the day, they had 2-track recorders. And it's very unlikely they took two tracks to try to connect them, get 4 tracks. They just took 2-track recorders. And with all of that screaming, let me just explain this. If the vocals got washed out with all that screaming, then also there was going to be bleed into the microphones of the bass and the guitars. Anything that was mic'd, the drums, was going to have that screaming going through their microphones, and it was going to be bleed through. So that goes back to my point that these videos that people keep pointing to and saying, oh, look, listen to the sound quality, listen to how good they sound. That stuff was fixed up afterwards, because there's other videos of the Beatles where they're not official videos, and maybe somebody took, they filmed it in the audience, and the sound is horrendous. It's horrible.
Yeah.
And many times in smaller venues, the Beatles were playing to a backing track. When the Beatles played on the Ed Sullivan Show, they played to a backing track. It's like the Dave Clark 5. They were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I have a clip where the backing track failed. And they were standing there, okay, there's no music. So nobody shows up on these types of venues, the Ed Sullivan Show, without a backing track. There's too much invested. There's too much money invested. There's too much PR invested. There's too much marketing invested. You can't afford to have a failure. You can't afford to have the band fall on its face. So anyway, all right, Billy, I'll wrap up here because I got to run over to my daughter's house. I got a little visit with my grandchildren tonight. I'm the one bringing the pizza. I got to bring the pizza over, but I really enjoyed the conversation, and sorry I had to race through the back end of this thing, but hopefully people will get what I'm talking about and just go to my website, Sage of Quay, SAGEOFQUAY, sageofquay.com, and you can go to my Polish Dead channel, and you can see all my research there.
That's great, Mike. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for coming on the show again. We'll hook up again sometime, and in the meantime, go enjoy your family and have some good pizza. Is there any pineapple on it? That's the question.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you so much.
Right, cheers now, folks. Thanks for watching. Cheers now.
Bye-bye now.
All right.